First of all, what I found that there's about 150 million working people in this country, right, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and that's as of maybe last month. And about 120 million of those people are working full-time, so 38 hours or more. What I also found was that she was actually right. There are a number of sources that say that about up to 70% of our workforce is unengaged. So I found this in a number of places. So now I'm even more interested. Right, this seems like it shouldn't be happening. Right? Without even knowing what it means to be unengaged, it sounds like 70% is just too much. So the next obvious step for me, and again, I'm a recovering academic, so what I did next was I did a little more research, and I found that there are really two parts to this that most people agree on. Engagement is actively participating in something. If we're actively doing something, we're engaged. So, all right, I wanted more. So the second thing I found was that most people report that being engaged means that we're happy to be doing the things that we're doing. If you can ask yourself, what is the likelihood that my employees are doing anything more and are happy to do anything more than what is minimally required of them, that's a pretty good indication that your employees are engaged. What is the impact if people are not engaged at work, regardless of what that number is? Well, the first thing that most of us probably think about is production, right? Regardless of what you do, you've got a product at the end of the day. And if your employees are not happy to be at work, if they're stressed out that they're at work, if they're not engaged, it's going to probably have an influence on production, isn't it? Second thing is turnover. This is not the first job that I've ever had in my life. And when I think back to all of the previous jobs that I've left, 99% of them, I left because I wasn't very happy. Okay, what about relationships? What's the impact of unengagement on relationships or engagement on relationships? What's the likelihood that the happier my employees are, the better my relationship with them is? It's probably a reciprocal effect, isn't it? Better the relationship, the happier they are. The happier they are, probably the better relationship that I have with my employees. So there is certainly some influence between engagement and our relationships. Well, what about safety? Obviously, a lot of us are here today because we're interested in safety. What is the influence of whether or not my employees are happy to be doing the things that they're doing and whether or not they're safe, whether or not they go home safe at the end of the day? Probably pretty significant. And finally, what these all have in common is bottom line, right? We probably tie a dollar figure to all of these things. So there's certainly a big impact, a big influence over engagement and business. So I'm still interested. But what about the rest of our lives? What about everything else? What we call the downstream impact. This statistic that I'm about to share with you was pretty surprising with me when I first saw it, and it's that we spend over 30% of our lives, of our waking lives, at work. If you average out all of the amount of hours that the average American works, and you take into consideration people who are not working, people who are unemployed, 0 hours a week, senior citizens, kids, all of that into consideration, we spend over 30% of our waking lives at work. What's the downstream impact on marriage? I read Forbes magazine sometimes, and a couple of months ago I was reading Forbes magazine after I had this conversation, or lack of conversation, with the young lady at the coffee shop, and I read a statistic from an actual study that linked one's sex life with stress at work. And the correlation, as you might imagine, is the more stress you have at work, the less sex you're having at home. So maybe that'll interest you. We do everything that we do for two reasons, right? To get something that we want or to avoid something that we don't want. Everything that we do for one of those two reasons. To get something that we want, or we do it to avoid something that we don't want. Now, as I said earlier, I'm a big food guy. I like to eat food a lot. So I'm going to use another food example. And my example is, I've got 5 guys in my close group of friends that get together about twice a year. We try to get together at least twice a year. And in these, whether it's the 4th of July or whether it's our fantasy football draft, we make a point to get together. And when we get together, we ask that everybody brings an item, a food item, to have. So like a potluck kind of meeting. Well, one of my friends has the sweetest, most adorable, kindest wife that you would ever meet in your life. She's the sweetest person I know. But we also all know that she's horrible at baking. And she always brings baked goods to these meetings. Right? So she brings the baked goods, and what do we inevitably do? We eat the food. Not because we want to, but we want to avoid embarrassment, right? We don't want to embarrass her. Now, there's a camera in front of me, so hopefully he doesn't see the video. Just kind of blew my cover there. Some suggestions for creating the conditions for success. Some suggestions for having any movement on this number, from 70% to maybe 50 to 30, wherever we go. There's some things that I would like to suggest that we start to do as leaders. The first is, don't police people. If you feel like the only way people are getting things done is when you're around them, that means you're policing them, right? And they're only doing it to avoid some threat, some punishment. Find out what frustrates people and try to help them out. Try to fix it, right? Ask questions. That was also mentioned earlier today. Ask questions. Of course, we've heard this one, don't micromanage. If you walk out onto the work floor and people start to turn around and walk away, you're probably micromanaging them. Allow for choices, right? Allow for choices. You know, I am where I am today because of many, many choices in my life. I've made millions of choices. We all have. Now, had I made different choices, I'd probably still be okay, right? And the same goes for your employees. And this goes back to micromanaging. It's not a cookie cutter situation. We all work, right? We all do many different things. It's a pretty complex environment. It doesn't mean that we have to do the same thing every day to get the result that we want. It's possible to allow for choices. And learn the fundamentals of behavior. Now, each and every one of you are here today to do that. So you certainly have a start. And when I say learn the fundamentals of behavior, I don't mean that it takes a budget to do this. I don't mean you have to buy a course. Maybe it takes picking up a book and learning a little bit more, reading an article. Start to learn the fundamentals of behavior. Somebody once told me that we don't have the right to make money at work where people are getting hurt. I completely agree with that. I don't think we should have the right to make money where people are not happy. Thank you very much.